Good morning, everybody. Does this come off? Oops. Oh, that's better. Good morning, and firstly, can I thank all of you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. It is fantastic to be here for my first time in Bahrain, and it is a great honor to be participating in this conference. What I'm going to talk about briefly now are a few of the key themes that are going to run through the two workshops that we're going to be looking at tomorrow. They're difficult issues, but they form a common thread that would guide us through the difficult and challenging process of feminist research. The starting point, and I say this as a socio-legal researcher, is to look at classical social theory and what feminist researchers, feminist theorists had to say about that. What problems did they find? And you'll see that there were a number of issues which revolve around the absence of women in classical social theory. While, as some commentators said, men had an absent presence. In other words, the subject of social theory was non-gendered, but implicitly masculine. There were the Enlightenment in Western thought, deriving from the theories of John Locke and other Western philosophers, of these dualisms that underlie thought and practice between male and female, public and private, emotion and reason, and the privileging of one side of those and the devaluing of the other. So that was the starting point for a lot of feminist critique of classical theory. Now, the big problem is, how do we do feminist research when there are so many feminisms? Women don't speak with one voice, and feminists don't speak with one voice. And that's a great thing, because that's what we like, don't we? As scholars, as academics, as researchers, different ideas, challenging different ideas. So you, I'm sure, are aware that there are, for example, liberal and equality feminists who see the goal of feminism as achieving formal, perhaps, equality with men, see it as a progressive thing through law, through other social institutions, at achieving formal equality. There are Marxist socialist feminists who see the problem underlying women's inequality as being class-based. So underlying patriarchy is the social division of labor and a class-based analysis. Radical feminists would like to separate out women altogether from men and see the underlying problem as male domination of women, and the only way women can deal with that is to remove themselves. Going on, we have difference feminists. Now, of course, a very influential and well-known difference feminist was Carol Gilligan, who wrote her seminal book, In a Different Voice. And what they looked at, they sometimes called cultural feminists, as well as difference feminists, or psychoanalytic feminists, was that men and women are not born innately different, but are socialized from an early age. And that's why they come to think in a different voice. And what some of these cultural or difference feminists feel is that in some ways there is a better or a positive quality to the more relational thinking that women have come to be socialized into. It's a contested view, of course. It relies very much on developmental theories of childhood and socialization. Against that, of course, what became very popular was standpoint feminism. That is, taking women as a group and privileging the standpoint of the woman's voice and the woman's view. Now, there are very many different standpoint feminists as well. There are those, the main proponent was Sandra Harding, but the Black American sociologist, Patricia Hill Collins, was enormously influential in creating standpoint feminism from the perspective of marginalized people, taking into account the views of women of color, their class, their gender. And then, of course, my favorite feminist position, postmodern and post-structural feminists. And that's Judith Butler, one of the most interesting, who wrote some really interesting things. And of course, what they're doing is disrupting the whole idea that there is a fixed viewpoint, a true viewpoint that we can perceive outside of the way thought is structured through discourse. And then finally, becoming much more popular these days, particularly among young feminists, is intersectionality. So that's a whistle-stop tour through only some of the very many feminisms. And what is the relevance of having so many feminisms for feminist research? Of course, they all, to some extent, give rise to different ontological and epistemological positions, which of course are key to formulating and doing research. So, how can we even talk about feminist research when women and feminists speak with so many voices? I think we can, and there are some common and distinctive assumptions, and we're going to work through these tomorrow in the workshops. What most feminists and most feminist scholars and researchers will see as key to feminist theory and research is the fact that women and their contributions have been marginalized, and this is reflected in research practice. So this idea of silencing, of marginalization, not only of women as researchers, but women as subjects. Then, of course, the issue we'll look at in a moment, the norms of science. How do they disguise what is perhaps some view as a masculinist view of the world, which is then portrayed as neutral and objective? Women's experiences, needs, ideas should be valued. And then most of all, what we'll look at in a moment, which is key to all feminist research, which differs in some ways from what is traditionally thought of as the role of the social researcher, being to explain and understand the social world, is the desire to change women's conditions through research. And that in some ways is key, the connection between scholarship and political action. So feminist research is not just about understanding society, it's about changing society. It has emancipatory and liberatory goals for women. So in this way, feminist research not only produces knowledge, but it has to be useful knowledge, and that is key to it. And in this way, it's often termed as a dual responsibility, a dual interconnected responsibility, because of course, as we know, knowledge and power are very much bound up. So that leads on to the next big issue that we'll be looking at in the workshops and putting into practice, critiques of positivism or empiricism. Now we know that positivism is an objective epistemology. It sees reality or facts as existing out there in the world independently of our interpretations of them. So the task of the researcher is to go out there and discover or test these objective facts about the world. And for this reason, the researcher must be detached, must be value-free, must be objective. Now, as you can imagine, there are a number of feminist critiques of positive and empiricism. In particular, the fact that this universal objective knowledge is not objective, but implicitly values a masculine knowledge which either overlooks or silences or excludes women. And most importantly, objectivity itself, they say, is a unattainable and indeed undesirable goal. We all come to research with our own preconceived ideas, which we bring to the process. How we select our subjects of topics of research, how we go about it, how we analyze it. So the other big issue, which we'll also look at in the workshops, is if objectivity is impossible, what it ignores in particular is social context. And we'll have a look at the importance of social context for feminist research. Now, I'm going to spend a very short time now, because I know we're running out of time. We will be having another much longer look in the workshops tomorrow at how we can build in some of these constructivist approaches to our research projects. As I'm sure you're all aware, the basis of constructivism is that social reality is not rooted in objective fact, but is constituted, created, constructed. And so our data in research, we don't go out there and collect data, we're creating data. And the two key issues which we'll have a look at is the notion of post-structuralism, how a post-structuralist approach can inform our research projects, based of course on the work of Michel Foucault and others, and people like Jacques Derrida. We'll look in particular at the theory behind and then the implementation of a post-structuralist feminism. We'll pick up on that in a lot more detail tomorrow, but just a couple of highlights I'd like to pick out now are the constructed, partial and politicized nature of these binaries underlying Western liberal thought that we've talked about is a strong issue for post-structuralist feminism. The constituting of gendered subjectivities, and I'll talk a bit tomorrow and we can discuss how that was really important in the research that I've undertaken on domestic abuse in private law cases between divorcing couples. And then the silences, resurrecting what Foucault called those subjugated knowledges, listening to women's unheard stories, all really important for a post-structuralist feminism. Finally, the big question that we have to pose, and this is a difficult topic, and I've struggled with this one, is what about feminism's aims to promote social change? If there is not one feminist goal, but multiple realities, multiple viewpoints, does that not cause the feminist aim, the movement, to disintegrate? How can we achieve feminism's liberatory goals through a post-structuralist perspective? Now, I think that the idea of Foucault's idea of power as not just a repressive, but also a creative force, where implicit in power is resistance. And so as Susan Boyd, a fantastic post-structural feminist in the area of family law said, by deconstruction, and we'll look a lot tomorrow in the first workshop at the process of deconstruction and discourse analysis, we can create the space for oppositional meanings to emerge and for the shifting of subjectivities, which, she explains, can at certain junctures be as crucial and as difficult as shifting economic structures. And those subjectivities can have a hugely powerful effect. Even when law reform progresses, the effects of these reforms can be undercut by powerful subjectivities, gendered subjectivities that exist in social space. So, what about the workshops tomorrow? We'll look a bit more at those tomorrow. Those are 10 tenets of feminist research that one of the foremost feminist researchers, Shulamit Reinhardt, set out. The first workshop, we're going to be looking at creating a feminist methodology and formulating in practical terms a research strategy. Now, I can see from the program that so many of you are doing amazing research, really innovative research, and it'll be brilliant to work on some strategies, look at future research that can be done from a feminist perspective. The second workshop will be looking at the Feminist Judgments Project, and we will be looking at a judgment that was given in the Court of Appeal in England, and how that could be written from a feminist perspective. Now, no one needs to be a judge to write a judgment, and we'll be putting that into practice tomorrow. So that's an example of feminist praxis, putting theory into practice. So thank you all very much.